So we're going to have Anthony speaking. And Anthony is the ISACA Kenya chapter president and chairman of the board, and is as well an associate cybersecurity and privacy at KPMG, and is the regional leader at the forefront of cybersecurity development in Africa, which is also leads KPMG cybersecurity, privacy, and trusted technology practice for East Africa, where he helps organizational build trusted issues in regards to cybersecurity. Please help me welcome Anthony as you take up to the podium.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Great. So by introduction, as you've heard, my name is Anthony Muiyuro. So what I do and who I am, I look after matters cybersecurity and privacy, and I know we've had fantastic presentations, particularly in the morning, and we're talking about metaverse, we're talking about Web 3.0 and digital transformation, right? And at the heart of it is this conversation around securing data, securing these technologies that we are building, right? So that is what I do. I'm the president of ISACA Kenya chapter. ISACA is a professional association. What we do is that we're in the business of talent development. So when we talk about building talent in the continent, particularly in some of these very emerging areas such as cybersecurity, emerging technology, risk management, IT audit, that is what we do. So for more information, go visit our website, www.isaca.org. I'm also the current associate director, and what I do at KPMG across East Africa is that I lead the cybersecurity practice. As a firm, we do a lot of research. We do a lot of advisory work helping our clients. So some of the things I'm going to share here is not just theory, but I believe it's based on the realities on the ground. Now, by a show of hand, how many people here are responsible for managing client data or any data of sorts that you collect and you are responsible for either managing or usage of such data? By a show of hands. Oh, fantastic. So how many here interact with like client data or financial data, data that ideally you'd say that it's important to your business? By a show of hand. Fantastic. So you'll find in actual sense that almost all of us deal with data, right? Because by the end of the day, when we talk about technology, this is a digital summit, right? By the end of the day, the key critical thing and the key value or rather driver of value is the data that we have, the data that we use. Because they say, and I think this is now a cliche, that data is the new oil, right? It's the new gold. It's actually the value in terms of when you talk about technology, it's at the heart of the conversation. So I'm going to share a few insights. And this is how I've segmented my presentation. First of all, I didn't mention this. I know we have an ethical AI specialist, that is Elizabeth, in the room. So I'm also an ethical hacker by training, right? Keyword is ethical. So when I was in university, I figured out that I had very interesting sets of skills. And I think I have a very prayerful mother because I had the option of taking the unethical route, right? But again, so I discovered that I could make a career out of my skills. And what I do is that I help clients. I don't tell them how they get hacked. I actually show them. Yeah, so I run and I manage a team of elite ethical hackers. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, some of these young people, they can do extremely dangerous things. And that is what we're also trying to do, because you'll figure out that the challenge that we are having today is actually a moral or even an ethical issue, right? There's a time that in the dailies they were saying that we are having syndicates of cyber security criminals. How many remember that time? And they said it was coming around, was it Juja area? Juja area, right? And I can tell you from the research that we've done, particularly within Kenya, most of the most dangerous cyber attacks normally come from that Kasarani area all the way to Juja. What am I trying to say? Some of the actors here are young people, and these are students. And that is why we need to appreciate why this is a conversation, particularly here even in Kenya, that all of us have to understand and have to be prepared, right? Because It's not only a big business issue, it's even SMEs are also suffering from the same. Someone will either steal money from you or even you'd expose yourself and your business. So I'm going to talk about why this is important. I'm also going to mention a few cyber attacks, what it means, and I'll try to distill it in a way that everyone can understand. I'm also going to talk about data privacy, right? How many have seen the Kenya Data Protection Act? Again, we said we have data in our businesses, right? You need to be aware. What does it mean for you? You need to be aware what are some of the exposures that you may have. You need to understand what you need to do to become or even just to drive compliance to this act. Because again, the way the Data Protection Commission was set up, believe me when I tell you this, they're going to start coming for people and there are fines and implication. You do not want to be on that list because it's in conversation. And then I'm also going to talk about positioning your business. What are some of the strategic imperatives when you talk about data privacy compliance? Why is this important? Now, the biggest asset, if you're to build a digital business or if you're collecting data from customers, clients, the biggest asset that you have in this 21st century is one, trust. Can people trust you? Can they trust you with their data? Can they trust that you're going to protect it? And trust is like a glass. It's like glass. Once it's shattered, you can try to piece it together, but the cracks will still be visible. And it's not only an issue with big businesses. I have seen in my own professional experience, businesses that did not get this right, and then once this is shattered, your customers ideally would be very hesitant. And we live in a day where we have a very dangerous set of people called KOT, Kenyans on Twitter. Once your business goes there, you're done. Why? Because you're going to troll for like a week, and everyone will remember that, you know what, we cannot trust you. So I'm going to talk about why this is a business advantage, why you need to really have some of these controls in place. Like I mentioned, Kenya, we are in a digital dispensation that can only accelerate. Currently, when we talk about the statistics, and apologies, I know the text might be quite small, from a population point of view, we currently have a population of 55 million and 55.6 million as of January, right? I believe this number has gone up. Probably now we're at 56 or something like that. And 29% of the Kenyan population, they actually live in urban areas, right? And 71% they still live in rural areas, right? But when you look at the demographic composition of such, we basically have a mean age of, do they say it's 19 or 20 in Kenya alone? In Africa, I know it's 19, but in Kenya alone, it's still a very young population, right? And this ideally, arguably, is the digital. This is a digital demographic. When we talk about connectivity, when we talk about basically some of the fantastic innovation that's going to be coming and is already here, you'll always see that Kenya has always been a front runner from an innovation perspective. Case in point, look at M-Pesa. They tried to launch the same product in other segments in Africa. It didn't have the success it achieved in Kenya. So I think there's also a cultural element to it, right? Now, from a social media perspective, currently, based on the statistics that we got, we are looking at 11.75 million social media users in Kenya. And this was as of January, right? Social media has become an extremely pivotal tool. And I'm going to mention particularly, and I'll say this without fear of contradiction, social media is the most effective tool that can ideally cause even a revolution in a country or even in a city. Case in point, let's go back to some of the scandals that I'm going to mention even when you talk about data. Social media has the ability to shape a narrative in the minds of our population. Demographically speaking, between the ages of 18 to 45, most likely, all of these people will ideally, majority of them have a, Facebook account, right? Between the ages of 18 or even younger to something like 32, it's highly likely that they also have what? An Instagram account, right? But then, of course, TikTok, you'd find even 16 years old, 15 years old, they're still on TikTok. What am I saying? Social media is a very, very effective tool, and that is why even for your business, particularly if you play in that space, it's obvious and it's good that we understand even some of the risks that we have there. Internet usage, particularly as of January, we had 23.3 million internet users in Kenya. Now, this ideally represents a 42% of our population. And what we are saying is that internet connectivity, there's a very big opportunity for us because, as you can see, coverage is still very low. So as we advance, and when we talk about digital government, and you'll find when you look at even the, there's a document that the government did, the Digital Blueprint for Kenya. There's a lot of focus on enhancing broadband connectivity to reach the unreachable. So there's a fantastic opportunity for us, particularly to really deepen our play within the digital space. And mobile connection is a big one for us. 63.4 million mobile connections were actually noted as of January this year. And my point is this: there's a very big opportunity for us to grow this space. And that is why when we talk about all these key things, digital, social media, internet connectivity, one thing comes to mind, which is data. What and how can we trust the data? How can we protect this data? And how can this be a big advantage for you as a business and even at a personal level? So every year we normally do a report, and we've dubbed this the KPMG CEO Outlook Report. So the thing we always want to find out is very simple. What keeps CEOs up at night? What are some of the challenges that they ideally are worried about? And over the last 6 or so years, cybersecurity has always featured among the top 6 or top 5 issues, right? But last year, 2021, an interesting thing came out, that cybersecurity was ideally number 1. And believe me, we were talking to like the top CEOs, some of them coming from big businesses. We're also looking at, particularly within the key segments, small, medium enterprises as well. What are some of the challenges that they had? And one of the reasons why cybersecurity was ideally number 1 is because of what? COVID, right? People were now working remotely. Work had changed. It's not a place you go, but it was something that you do. You could work from home. Some people would ideally even go to islands and still work there. So the challenge was now the connectivity in terms of the digital connectivity, and that was a very, very good avenue for some of these cyber attackers. I remember during that period, I was actually, and this was like a chilly Tuesday morning, and I opened my email and I found that I was sent by WHO.org an email telling me that there are new emerging symptoms for COVID, right? Now, human beings are interesting. When human beings are emotional, they're not rational, right? And what it was telling me is that, Anthony, you need to find out the new symptoms. And by there I can tell you the truth. I think I had myself cough at that point. Because, there was that replay of, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I just went to the supermarket like a day before, and I was like, might this have the new symptoms that probably are manifesting? And guess what? It was actually a phishing attack. And this is me, someone who knows better. And guess what, guys? I clicked on that thing. A cybersecurity expert. Clicking on a phishing email. The good thing, the anti-malware that I had was fast enough to detect that this was actually one of the variants of a ransomware, right? What I'm trying to say is this: cyber criminals will always be opportunistic. They will always try to prey, or rather to target people based on some of these inherent vulnerabilities. And one of them, and the biggest one, and you will see that, is human weaknesses. The ability of people to easily trust. How many times have you received even a message from this guy's in committee telling you that you've won something, or there's something that is under your name, or particularly you've won a competition and they pose a Safaricom and they can try different variants of some of these attacks? My question to you, why are they so persistent? Because I mean, in an average, in a month, how many would you receive on average? Right? How many on average? Is the number high? Yes. So that tells you that people actually fall for such scams, because I mean, in cybersecurity, I always say one thing. It's the economics that normally motivate people. It's all about the money. So from a CEO perspective, this is what they told us. Cyber happens to be one of the biggest issues that they're facing. So what are some of the top cyber attacks? Just for your information. And you can think of this from a business perspective as well as also at an individual level. How many here work in the finance department or finance-related department? All right? How many here in the marketing department? There's one. Marketing. How many people here are in IT? I think marketers are quite many in the room, right? How many people here in IT? So there's one. Legal. I met 2 brilliant lawyers. Yes. Which other one? Great. The reason why I'm asking this is so that we can understand this is not an IT issue alone, right? This is actually even a geopolitical issue. And I'll mention this. I think 2 weeks ago, we were in a workshop where we had met some military guys, because it is now very clear that the borders for any country has evolved not only just to the physical space, but now it's actually even in the cyberspace. So to maintain the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a country, we need to monitor such. You'll be interested to know that even in the military here in Kenya, we are now getting experts who are looking at that. For instance, how many have been monitoring the Ukraine-Russia crisis? Yeah? You will see that one of the issues that has also been a concern has been cyber. And let me qualify this. For instance, what would happen if KPLC was down for like a month? What would it mean for a country? Or rather, what would even happen if a very critical infrastructure like M-Pesa was down for a week? The economy will feel it, right? And that is what we mean when we talk about the evolution of cyber. Remember when we started our career, around 15 years ago, I think I used to sit in a corner, and what I'll do, I'd go with a flash disk and update antiviruses. And I'd feel very good about myself, right? Because cyber was just all about viruses. But now the evolution has ideally grown to what I'm going to mention here. Some of the cyber attacks that you'd find identity-related security issues, right? And it's good that we understand, particularly when we're doing some of the simulations, the area that we always try to target is one, Active Directory. For the non-techies in the room, Active Directory is actually the place in IT that keeps all the admin accounts. Why is this important? If I target that place and I get an administrative account, what you can do with that account is they have what's called keys to the kingdom. What keys to the kingdom is that you can do almost everything, right? You can do almost everything. You can move to any system. You can do a lot of stuff. So identity-related issues are normally number one. Like, for instance, what will happen if somebody gets access to your bank account, or rather, your logging details? And when we do some of these things, particularly, there's what we call creation of rogue Wi-Fi. And this is where you create a Wi-Fi, and it's a very easy thing to do. And then I name it Panari, but when you log into that Wi-Fi, you actually logging into my Wi-Fi. So when you do that, you'll access your bank, yes, but I'll be able to sniff your logins, right? And that is why it's important that we understand logins and credential security becomes extremely very critical. The other one is ransomware. How many know about ransomware? I'm sure we've all heard about ransomware, right? Right? Okay, who has never heard of ransomware? Ransomware, by a show of hands. Okay, who can tell me the first instance of a ransomware ever detected globally? Which year? Come on, guys. Okay, how many say 2015? How many say in the 2000s? From 2001 going on. How many say in the 90s? Okay, none. How many say in the 50s? How many say in the 80s? All right, okay. So do I take your silence to be, Anthony, tell us the answer? So this was actually 1989, right? 1989. A gentleman called Joseph Pope attended a WHO conference, and they were actually, during that time, there was this rush towards the AIDS vaccine, right? And they wanted to know who's going to come up with this vaccine. So this guy, what he did was brilliant. He just created a very interesting virus, got around 300 floppy disks. How many remember the floppy? Now you'll show your age, yeah? Okay, so the floppy disk, for the people who do not know, it was a version of what we call today as a USB, right? But you can look it up. I'm sure there's a museum that has it somewhere. So what he did, he actually gave it to all the conference attendees and told them that there is actually a groundbreaking discovery in this AIDS vaccine rush. So what do you think a room full of eager, curious scientists are going to do? They're going to find out. They want to find out what the content is, right? So what they did is, once they did that, that virus could actually hide the file, and there was a note that you need to send me this amount of money. We didn't have Bitcoin then. So there was an address that send this money there, and then you'll get your data. What I'm trying to say is that there's nothing new under the sun. 30 plus years later, we're still seeing the same variant of things. And it's important we understand this, because when you have instances where your data can be lost by a single click, then you need to understand, why is this happening? And one of the key things I can tell you confidently is that we need to be very aware. The culture of understanding some of these risks has to be there in your organization. There's a time we did a social experiment, and what we did is that we bought like very shiny USB sticks, and then we created a payload, which is a malicious software. So we sent it to, and actually what we did, we sprayed it in the parking lots and in the corridors, and we just threw some on the floor. Now, human beings are interesting. What do you think is the most natural thing for someone to do when they collect, or rather pick, a very shiny, nice-looking, new flash disk? They slot it in, right? And that is what 90% of the guys who actually picked it did. What I'm saying is this: human weaknesses are always going to be the biggest. Extortion emails, and I know we've received this, we probably have seen, particularly when someone says that he's a prince from Nigeria, and there's money that has been locked in a certain escrow account, and they actually need you to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, that has always been the script. Phishing attack, like I mentioned, social engineering is all about deception. Deceiving the users. And this is important because you need now to train your people, so that, because one click can ideally even corrupt the files in your business that ideally would, and if you don't have any backups, unfortunately, it might leave you at a very desperate position. And also cloud-related issues, particularly when you're moving to the cloud. So from our research, we found out that the key areas that are most critical in terms of exposures, the first one is supply chain. And we talk about supply chain is where we talk about third-party risks. Every business probably has a third party, right? This is someone that you work with. You give them access to your data. They're supposed to do something. But you know, one of your biggest exposure points will actually be with your third parties. So what do you need to do? You need to have clarity of what third-party security is all about. Because I've seen this from many businesses, particularly big businesses. The biggest exposure can ideally come from third parties. And then the other one is VPN network. VPN network, and I don't want to sound too technical, is all about remote working setups, and this is what we saw, particularly after COVID. Everyone was trying the great digital migration, right? And many businesses became COVID, their digital transformation became COVID accelerated, right? But again, something that has been designed to only handle 10% of the load, once you have like 90 or 80% of the same load, they're bound to be a problem, right? And that was one of the issues that we saw there. And then, of course, cloud-based attacks. When you talk about moving to the cloud, basically it is also a very, very attractive avenue for cyber attackers. So as you're migrating to the cloud, I always say this with caution. Go to cloud, but also ensure that some of these security things are met. Now, allow me to talk about data privacy. And this is where I want you to listen to me, right? Right now, there's actually something going around, I don't know how many have seen it, that the Office of the Data Commissioner has a deadline that people need to register as data controllers. How many have seen that? How many know what it means to be a data controller? Okay. By a show of hand, I think I asked this when we started. How many collect data from clients? And I think half of the room lifted their hands, right? So when you're collecting data from either your customers, they're giving you maybe their names, details, contact details, and whatnot, that automatically qualifies you to be a data controller. But the good news is there's a threshold in terms of who ideally needs to register, because they're taking a prioritized approach. The question that I want to ask you, the first thing is this: you cannot protect data that you do not understand. How many understand the data that they collect very well? Because the Act is very clear. It mentions particularly what data can be classified as personal identifiable information. The Act is very clear in terms of who is the data subject, right? So we need to interrogate this, particularly if you're responsible either managing or collection, or you sit in a position of influence on how data is being used. This is something that we need to understand. So there are key principles that I want to share. Again, the slide might be busy, but I'm sure we'll share it and everyone will have a copy. The first thing is traceability. Actually, transparency. And this is where we need to understand the data that is available. What data are we collecting about our people? Because automatically it exposes you, or rather it actually, once you have these kinds of data, then you qualify to comply to the Act. So basically understanding how that data, which data it is, how that data moves, and how that data flows in the organization or even within your company. The second one is traceability. Now, do you have mechanisms in place to see if this data is comprehensive? One of the key principles that we have in the Kenya Data Protection Act, because ideally there are like 10 generally accepted principles. One of the key principles is data accuracy, that the state of the data that you need to have needs to be accurate. So that is also something that you need to understand. The other one is data quality, that the data is actually in a state of consistency, the data is complete, there's also timeliness, so that it's appropriate for the specific use. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when you are able to manage this data and even having a good understanding of it, then we can talk about the protection. Because remember what I said earlier, it's all about protecting the data, right? Now, allow me to mention this. How many recall the Cambridge Analytica scandal? There's a documentary I like, it's on Netflix, it's called The Great Hack. How many remember this scandal? The Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, right? Arguably, it's one of the biggest scandals that we've had that precipitated most of these regulations that we saw, right? GDPR came after that scandal. Why? Because the world now realized how data and how powerful it is. Because the story goes that Cambridge Analytica got data from Facebook, and everyone was trying to do that personality profile test. I did that as well. And what that data was being used was to inform or even influence election outcomes. So, for instance, what Donald Trump did when he won the presidency, right? It's actually documented, so it's in the public space, I can say this. What he did is that they got a very good campaign strategy that they were able to use your data profile, your profile based on the data they've collected about you to send you specific messages, right? For instance, if you did that personality profile and they realized that Magdalene responds to fear, and they realize that James responds to hope, they will send a message to Magdalene depicting a very bad image of the competition, right? And they would send a message to James telling him, you know what, as your new president, these are the things that we are going to do just to improve your life and improve the state of the country. They also did this. They realized that they had a lot of non-voting population in America. America has around, is it 400 million? Right? They realized only less than like 40% actually turn out to vote. So then the question was, why are the rest not voting? So using data, they were able to analyze the deep underlying sentiments. And that is how they got to really activate that big voter count. Are you seeing why this is important? Data and social media are the tools that can be used today, as we speak, to even cause a revolution, can inform election outcomes, and can actually do more. Why? We're living in an age where data can be weaponized. Please do not forget that. And that is why we have to talk about these rather boring things so that we get it right. All the regulations ideally were precipitated by that scale of data misuse. And that is what we've seen over the years. GDPR was enacted, or rather effected in 2018. The Cambridge Analytica scandal was around 2016, right? Because today, the biggest weapon we have is data. Everyone actually They say that in every 1 minute, like so much data is being collected about you. From morning, your telco is collecting data about you. If you have an Android phone, all these apps are collecting data about you. Probably you've logged into this Wi-Fi. Data is being collected about you. You've accepted a cookie. What is a cookie? Cookie stores data about you, browsing history, and all those things. Data is always being collected about you. So it's important we understand that this is a relevant conversation about all of us, right? How do you explain? How many have mentioned something in a room, and then you go on Instagram, you get an advertisement that is exactly to what you mentioned 2 minutes ago? How do you explain that? Is it magic? Nasi uchawi, yeah? But it's data, because that's what we call micro-translations, right? And that is why big tech today are actually being focused on by all regulators globally. How many read their privacy policies? How many read their privacy policies? When you're downloading an app, do you take time to interrogate what they're saying? Can I give you homework? Next time you're downloading maybe an app like TikTok or any social media, please take that privacy policy. Go look at it. And if you have a lawyer friend, and the lawyers will agree, some of them, it's only that they put it in a language that you will not understand. You will realize you're doing like what the Bible says, giving out your birthright, right? Because what you're doing, you're giving them consent to do so much. And that is why we need to understand that, and even you as data controllers and data processors, you're basically required to, be able to, you also are required to be able to communicate to your customers why this data is important, right? So this is a data privacy journey. I'm just going to mention few key things. I can't mention all in the interest of time that you need to understand. The first thing is initiating this in terms of your business. You have to have clarity. Number one, what requirements do I need to be compliant to? Or do you want to pay a 5 million fine? I don't believe so, right? Because rights, data privacy is all about one thing: empowerment of your data subjects, and also ensuring that data controllers and data processors are doing and are accountable, are doing the right things, and they are accountable. The data subjects are given their rights in terms of what they need to understand. And that is the spirit behind the act. So you need to understand what requirements are relevant for your business and for you, regardless of your scale and your size, right? This is important for all of us, and that is why there's a big focus, particularly within the next year, for awareness and awareness creation and training, so that organizations understand, right? Now, there's a day I went to a supermarket, and I was visiting a relative, and I don't live in that area, so I went to that, it was one of these big supermarkets actually. I bought something, the next day, I was receiving a message from the local politicians, yeah, because I paid by M-Pesa. How many have had such an instance? Do you know that you can actually take that person or that entity to court? Are you aware of the same? Are you aware that you have a right for any organization not to share your data without telling you? Are you aware of that? Actually, that is what the spirit behind the act is. My lawyers will agree, or they will correct me, that particularly when we talk about compliance, and that is why we have to have the knowledge that data privacy is your right, and ideally you have certain things that are important for you so that we all know. And then, of course, this is particularly if you're an organization, you need to drive this maturity by having clarity of what it means, data minimization. If you have to share data, how then do you share this data? And then, of course, privacy impact or even privacy risks assessment. Like I mentioned, if you don't understand the kind of data that you have, maybe it would be a good idea to embark on this journey. Just take a very proactive approach in terms of understanding this is the data that we collect and what are some of the exposures that you may have. And this is what we help our clients basically just to do that. And then, of course, building some of this structures in place, making sure consent is enshrined, data subjects, their rights, particularly where maybe they need to access their data, they can send you information about their data. You need to have the capacity to respond to such, and then of course building and making making a lot of awareness so that you build that culture that everyone understands. You cannot just send any kind of data, be it bio data, be it medical data, be it financial data. data that can identify any natural human being, you cannot just share it with anyone, right? And that ideally has to be built from a culture perspective. So as I wind up, main things we want to talk about, technology is important. We have to adopt technology, but we need to look at the perils, the dangers of some of these issues we are talking about. Data privacy, like I mentioned, is a big thing. I highly encourage each and every one in this room. We need to have visibility and understand what this means for your business. And then, of course, being able just to look at how data moves within your business, and how data, and what are some of the controls that you need to have in place. And some of these controls are very basic, guys. They are very basic that you need to have in place to protect that data. Things like password, making sure that everything that contains data is well managed, well controlled, and well secured. How do you collect data? How do you protect it? And then, of course, if you need assistance, that is where experts like myself, I had to pitch at some point, right? That is why experts like myself can help you really drive this. And I'll share my contact details. So, from a strategic perspective, at any given point in time, and this is, I believe, my last slide, data, or second last, data is being processed by either your organizations or your third parties, right? So visibility is important. And I really want to simplify that. Visibility is important. You cannot protect what you do not understand. We are talking about being digital. At the very heart of being digital is what? Data. Data is the driver. So the key thing is anything of value has to be protected. How then do you protect it? And then, of course, you need to look at your people so that they also understand. It's a people play as well. Processes, you need to have the right processes in place. We have our good lawyers in the room. If you need assistance on regulatory compliance and some of the things that you need to have in place, particularly looking at exposure management, breach and exposure management, you can talk to them. They can also guide you because privacy is a multidisciplinary conversation, right? It's not just an IT issue. You need to understand what does it mean for your business. Okay, let me put this way. Can you afford to be fined 5 million shillings as a business? Be it small, okay, and it's relative. There's a business that ideally 5 million is a drop in the ocean, right? But you need to understand what that will mean for you. Breach and some of the simulations to understand the impact that it would have for your business. So you need to work with different people just to have a very good understanding. And then invest in the right tools, invest in the right technology, because what you don't spend in the actual securing and even enforcing some of the things I've talked about, you'll ultimately spend that amount of money in responding to some of those incidences. True or false? Because it's true, and I've seen this. An organization, there's one CEO, 1 year, they didn't want to spend on cyber, and they say this is too much, and guess what? The next year, believe it, they were actually in the news, and they were hit a lot of money, millions in dollars, right? That is the scale, because some of these actors are not coming from the small kills. So if you work for a big business, you also need to be an ambassador. That we also need to look at this proactively. What do we need to have in place? So again, protection of personal data becomes extremely important. And then understanding the rules. You need to understand the rules of the game, right? Clarity on what the regulations are talking about is critical. The reason why I'm saying this with a lot of passion is some of these actors within the Commission of the Data Protection, I know them. And I've been privy to that, some of the things that they're saying, that this is the approach we're going to take. Because many people are ideally right now, particularly in an electioneering period, there's a lot of outcry. I'm sure you've probably, by a show of hand, let me do this as a survey. By a show of hand, how many people have received a text from a politician you know nothing about? You know nothing about, right? How did they get their data, your data? You went into a room, or rather a building, you signed in the visitor's book, right? Where does that data go? That askari will be given 200 shillings, or 1,000 shillings, or 10,000 shillings, and they'll give out that book with 10,000 records. Are you seeing what I'm saying? And that is what, for me, by the way, I have a rule. I never, when I'm asked for my ID number, there's one number, default. I put the wrong number. Yeah, I put the wrong number intentionally so that should anyone get that data, if you have the combination of my name, full names, maybe 3 names, my ID number, and my phone telephone number, that's a very dangerous combination. Don't you agree? And that is why we need to be very cautious so that we understand what this means. You find out that somebody called and swim swapped you or did something maybe to your account, and you think that this is magic. No, there's no magic. There's a way that they normally do this, and that is why we need to understand what does it mean for you, and then how do you protect yourself. Never disclose what, like for instance, I have a policy, I don't leave my IDs anymore at the reception or somewhere, right? Why do they need my ID? I'll give my driving license, take that, or something else. Why do you need my ID? Convince me, right? Because if somebody can make a copy of your ID, knows your name and all that, are you seeing the danger? And that is why we need to ask these questions. Is this necessary, right? And I'm not inciting you, by the way. The last one is you need to build a business brand, a trusted business brand. That is why, like I said earlier on when I started, trust is the currency of transaction. If clients do not trust you, you want to be a digital business, be it a small or a big business, you've lost this because customers are not really going to trust you when you are not taking care of their data. You need to also mitigate data privacy exposures and breaches. Sometimes this will translate to actual amounts of money. So do you want to lose money from your business? You don't want to do that, right? And if you're working for an organization and probably you're the gatekeeper and something happens and you are supposed to inform them, tell them that, you know what, this is one of the areas we can even lose money. And I encourage you again, I think I've said this like 5 times, go read the act. Go look at the fines and the penalties that have ideally been articulated there. And then business process automation, that can also be an enabler. You want to leverage on efficiencies and all that. It's going to help you as a business basically to look at how you can be more nimble and efficient. And then, of course, lastly, improved data management. Because as I end my presentation, currently in Africa, among the 54 countries, the legislations that we have speaking to data privacy is only 61%, which is 33 countries, right? In draft, actually 11%, which is actually 6. No legislation at all. Currently, we only have 10 countries that have no legislations, right? And then, of course, the ones that, of course, we'd say we don't have much information about them would only be 5, which makes 9%. That tells us that as a continent, we are making progress in terms of moving into this age because Africa is the next frontier of economic development and digital transformation. In my view and conviction, I believe that digital is going to be the enabler for us to get this competitive edge. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. Thank you very much.
I think you've taken us through quite a lot in terms of cybersecurity. And I'm kind of feeling like we as digital marketers, we are going to have a beef with you guys because you are going to contain us a lot in terms of getting data or what are all those the implications of just limiting the aspect of having to use the digital data that we get online. But all in well, it's for good.